What Trump just did is in the Bible. Iran and Venezuela, two nations, two continents, two separate crises, and one president issuing warnings to both, in the same season, in the same tone, with the same unmistakable message. One is in the Middle East, the epicenter of biblical prophecy. The other is in South America, thousands of miles from Jerusalem, seemingly disconnected from anything prophetic. Why these two nations? Why now? Why at the same time? What if this isn't about politics at all? What if this is about positioning? Let's start with Iran. What Trump just did to Iran. Picture this moment. I need you to understand the context before we examine what Trump actually did. Because the context is what makes this action so significant prophetically. Iran is already under unprecedented pressure. Their economy isn't just struggling, it's in freefall. The Iranian rial has lost nearly 40% of its value. Inflation has made basic goods unaffordable for ordinary citizens. Shopkeepers in Tehran's Grand Bazaar, the merchants who have kept the Iranian economy moving for generations, closed their stalls and walked into the streets in protest. And it didn't stop there. Within days, protests erupted in 27 different cities across Iran. Students joined, truckers joined, bus drivers, factory workers. This wasn't one group with one grievance. This was a nation fracturing from the inside out. But here's what made the regime's situation even more desperate. And this connects directly to what Trump did. And it's going to become essential when we examine the birth pang pattern and see how all of this fits together. Iran had just emerged from a 12-day military confrontation with Israel. Iranian forces and proxies had been hit hard. The regime that projects strength throughout the Middle East was suddenly looking vulnerable, both externally on the battlefield and internally in the streets. The regime was cornered, pressured from outside, crumbling from within. And that's when President Trump issued a warning that sent shockwaves around the world. Just before 3 a.m. Eastern Time, while most of America was asleep, Trump posted a direct message to Iran's leadership. And the language was unlike anything we typically see in diplomatic communications. If Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. Locked and loaded. I need you to understand what those words mean, because this is going to become absolutely crucial when we examine the prophetic significance of this moment. And it connects directly to what we'll see Trump do to Venezuela. This isn't diplomatic language. Diplomats don't say locked and loaded. State Department officials don't threaten military intervention over Twitter in the middle of the night. Carefully worded policy statements leave room for interpretation, for negotiation, for face-saving retreats. But locked and loaded leaves no room. It's military language. It means weapons are ready, forces are positioned, the trigger is prepared to be pulled. And Trump directed this language at the nation explicitly named in Ezekiel's end times prophecy. But here's what makes this even more significant. And this connects to what we just examined about Iran's biblical identity, and it's going to become even more important when we examine the birth pang patterns. This wasn't an isolated statement. This was part of a posture. Think about what the Trump administration has already done to Iran. They withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. They reimposed crippling sanctions. Iran didn't back down. Iran's Secretary of the National Security Council fired back with a counter-threat that raised the temperature even higher. Trump should know that American interference in this internal issue is equivalent to chaos across the entire region and the destruction of American interests. Chaos across the entire region. Destruction of American interests. Think about what Iran is threatening. Not just retaliation against military targets, regional chaos, the destabilization of the entire Middle East, attacks on American interests wherever they can be found. This is escalation, not de-escalation. This is doubling down, not backing down. And here's what makes this exchange so prophetically significant. Because this connects to everything we've examined about Persia's role in Scripture, and it's going to become absolutely crucial when we see how Venezuela fits into this picture. This is pressure at a prophetic fault line. Think about the timing. The Middle East is already volatile. Israel has already engaged in direct conflict with Iranian forces. The Abraham Accords have realigned regional alliances. Saudi Arabia and Israel are closer than ever. The entire region is pressurizing. Nations are choosing sides. And in the middle of all of this, the most powerful nation on earth issues a direct military threat to the nation explicitly named in Ezekiel's end times prophecy. The nation that will be part of the coalition against Israel in the last days. The nation that is already aligned with Russia, another key player in Ezekiel 38, all positioned against the Jewish state. That nation is now being directly confronted by the world's dominant military power. But here's what I need you to see, and this is going to become absolutely essential when we examine why this moment feels different, and it connects to the snare Jesus warned about in Scene 9. This isn't invasion. Not yet. There are no American troops crossing into Iranian territory, no missiles flying between Washington and Tehran in full-scale war. But it's also not peace. It's something in between, something that builds pressure without releasing it, something that draws lines and dares the other side to cross them, something that ratchets tension higher and higher without triggering the explosion. Yet. And that in-between state, that's exactly what Jesus described. Wars and rumors of wars. We're in the rumor phase, the threat phase, the phase where everyone can feel that something is coming, but nothing has fully erupted yet. But here's what makes this particular rumor phase so significant. And this connects to what we'll examine about the birth pang pattern. And it becomes absolutely essential when we see the same pattern applied to Venezuela. The rumors are getting louder. The threats are getting more direct. The pressure is getting more intense. Locked and loaded isn't a whisper. It's a shout. And Iran's counter-threat of chaos across the entire region isn't a diplomatic hedge. It's a promise of escalation. The space between rumor and war is shrinking. But here's what most people miss about this moment, and this is going to become crucial when we examine the prophetic pattern the prophets saw. Trump isn't just confronting Iran in isolation. At the same time, he's pressuring Iran militarily. He's applying economic pressure to Iran's allies and partners, including Venezuela, which means the squeeze isn't happening on one front. It's happening on multiple fronts simultaneously. But before we can understand Venezuela's role, we need to establish the biblical framework that makes sense of all of this. Because what we're seeing isn't random confrontation. It fits a pattern Jesus described 2,000 years ago. And that pattern is going to become absolutely essential for understanding everything that follows. Here's something most people don't realize. Iran isn't just a modern nation with modern conflicts. Iran has a biblical identity that stretches back thousands of years. And that identity has never left Scripture. The nation we call Iran today was known in the ancient world as Persia. And Persia appears throughout the Bible, not as a minor footnote, but as a major player in God's prophetic narrative. In the book of Daniel, Persia is the empire that conquers Babylon. The handwriting on the wall that Daniel interprets? It announces the transfer of power to the Medes and Persians. Daniel himself serves in the Persian government under Cyrus and Darius. But here's what makes Persia's biblical role so significant. And this connects directly to what we'll examine about Iran's position in end times prophecy. Persia is explicitly named in Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel 38:5 lists the nations that will come against Israel in the last days as part of a massive coalition led by Gog from the land of Magog, and right there, in black and white, is Persia. This isn't speculation. This isn't symbolic interpretation. Persia is named, by name, as part of the end times coalition that moves against Israel. But here's what I need you to understand, and this is going to become essential when we examine the birth pang framework in Scene 3, and it explains why the timing of current events matters so much. Ezekiel 38 hasn't been fulfilled yet. The invasion Ezekiel describes, the coalition of nations moving against Israel from the north, hasn't happened. The conditions aren't fully in place. We're not there yet. But here's what's sobering about Iran's current trajectory. And this connects to what Trump just did. Prophecy doesn't start with invasion. Prophecy starts with positioning. Think about what has to happen before Ezekiel 38 can be fulfilled. Nations have to align. Alliances have to form. Iran has to be in a position militarily, politically, ideologically, where joining a coalition against Israel makes sense. And look at where Iran is right now. They're aligned with Russia. They're hostile to Israel. They've funded proxies throughout the Middle East, Hezbollah, Hamas, militias in Iraq and Syria, all positioned against the Jewish state. Their leadership regularly calls for Israel's destruction. Iran is moving along the trajectory that leads to Ezekiel 38, not fulfilling it today, but positioning for it, aligning toward it, moving in the direction the prophet described. And here's what makes this so important, because this connects directly to the pressure Trump just applied. Before we go any further, I need to establish something important, because what I'm about to show you about Venezuela is going to raise questions, and I want to make sure we're building on a solid biblical foundation, one that will become essential when we examine the pattern the prophet saw in Scene 7. What's happening with Iran and Venezuela is not the fulfillment of specific prophecy. Let me be very clear about that. Ezekiel 38 hasn't happened. The tribulation hasn't started. We're not in the final 7 years. I'm not claiming that Trump's actions fulfill any specific prophetic text. But here's what I am saying, and this is anchored directly in Scripture. Matthew 24:6-8. And ye shall hear of wars, and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes, in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. The beginning of sorrows. In the original Greek, that phrase is Odin, birth pangs, labor pains. Jesus is describing a pattern, not a single event, but a process. Contractions that start slow and spaced out, but gradually increase in frequency and intensity until they become unavoidable. And here's what makes the birth pang framework so important for understanding what's happening right now. And this connects directly to what we'll examine about Venezuela in Scenes 5 and 6. And it becomes absolutely crucial when we see why everything is converging in Scene 8. Birth pangs don't announce the exact moment of delivery. They announce that the process has started. A woman in labor doesn't know precisely when the baby will arrive after the first contraction, but she knows something has begun that will only intensify until delivery comes. That's what Jesus is describing about the end times. Wars, rumors of wars, nations rising against nations, famines, earthquakes, pestilences, all of it increasing in frequency and intensity, all of it building toward something. And here's the key insight, because this is going to become crucial when we see Iran and Venezuela together, and it explains why the simultaneous timing matters so much. The contractions aren't new, the spacing is what's changed. We've seen Middle East tensions before. We've seen economic pressure on hostile nations before. We've seen American presidents issue warnings before. But we haven't seen everything stacking simultaneously like this. Iran pressured, Venezuela pressured, both in the same season, both with the same tone, both while the Middle East sits on the edge of wider conflict. The contractions are coming closer together. But Iran is only half the picture. And here's where things get really interesting. Because the Bible doesn't just focus on the Middle East, and what we're about to examine about Venezuela will reveal a dimension of prophecy most people overlook. Here's something that often gets overlooked in prophetic discussions, and this is going to become essential when we examine what Trump just did to Venezuela, and absolutely critical when we see how it connects to the larger pattern in Scene 7. The Bible's prophetic focus is on Israel and the Middle East. That's undeniable. Jerusalem is the center of God's prophetic calendar. The nations immediately surrounding Israel, including Persia, are explicitly named in end times passages. But here's what most people miss. The Bible also shows that nations far from Israel still affect her fate. Think about the economic connections, trade routes, oil, resources, alliances. Nations that have never set foot in the Middle East can still strengthen or weaken Israel's enemies through economic relationships. Revelation 18 describes the fall of Babylon, a system of global commerce that has enriched the merchants of the earth. Kings and traders weep when this system collapses because their wealth was tied to it. But here's what makes this significant for understanding Venezuela. And this connects directly to the pattern we're about to examine. Before nations collapse, their wealth is often stripped. Before military defeat comes economic pressure. And that pattern, economic pressure preceding larger judgment, is exactly what we're seeing applied right now to Iran and to Venezuela. But wait, Venezuela? What does a South American nation have to do with biblical prophecy? Why should we care about a country nowhere near Israel? That's what we need to examine next, because Venezuela's role is more significant than most people realize, and it's going to connect directly to everything we've discussed about Iran. Scene 5. Venezuela, the oil gatekeeper in the Western Hemisphere. Here's why Venezuela matters, and this is going to become absolutely crucial when we see what Trump just did in Scene 6, and essential for understanding the pattern the prophets saw in Scene 7. Venezuela sits on one of the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world. Some estimates put it as the largest. More oil than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, more than Russia. In a world that still runs on oil, that makes Venezuela enormously strategic. But here's what makes Venezuela's position so significant prophetically. And this connects to the economic warfare pattern we just examined. And it's going to become even more important when we see why this is happening now. The Venezuelan regime has cultivated relationships with Iran. Yes, the same Iran we just discussed. The same Persia named in Ezekiel 38. But here's what's truly significant. And this is going to become essential when we see what Trump just did. and it connects directly to the Revelation 18 themes we examined earlier. Venezuela represents economic leverage in the Western Hemisphere for nations hostile to Israel and her allies. Think about what that means. A nation thousands of miles from Jerusalem, with no direct military threat to Israel, can still strengthen the economic position of Israel's enemies. Oil money flowing to Iran, sanctions relief through back channels, economic partnerships that undermine Western pressure. The biblical principle holds: nations far from Israel still affect her fate. Just as Trump issued warnings to Iran, he's applied pressure to Venezuela. Sanctions, economic restrictions, direct warnings to the regime, pressure that targets the oil wealth Venezuela has used to sustain its government and support its allies. But here's what makes this significant. Is there a biblical pattern for this kind of dual pressure? Does the Bible show us anything about how God confronts nations before larger events unfold? That's what we need to examine next, because the prophets saw something that looks remarkably familiar. Here's what the prophets consistently recorded, and this is going to tie everything we've examined together, and it connects directly to why this is happening. Here's what makes the current moment unlike anything we've seen in recent history, and this connects everything we've examined about Iran and Venezuela to the larger prophetic picture. And it's going to become essential when we examine Jesus' warning about the snare in the next scene. The convergence is unprecedented. Think about what's happening simultaneously. Israel is at the center of global attention. Events are compressing. Decisions are stacking. The space between contractions is shrinking. In the past, these crises might have happened sequentially, one resolved before the next emerged. But now, they're happening simultaneously. Here's something that most people have completely missed about what's happening in the Middle East, and this is going to connect directly to the pressure on Iran and Venezuela. And it becomes absolutely essential for understanding why this moment feels different from anything in modern history. While Trump pressures Iran with military threats and Venezuela with economic sanctions, something else is happening in the Middle East that's reshaping the entire region: the Abraham Accords. And what's really happening with these peace agreements is far more significant than the headlines suggest. Let me show you what I mean, because once you see the pattern, you'll understand why the pressure on Iran isn't happening in isolation. It's happening as part of a larger realignment that the prophets described thousands of years ago. The Abraham Accords began in 2020, when Israel signed normalization agreements with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Then came Sudan, then Morocco. 4 Arab nations that had technically been in a state of war with Israel for decades, suddenly establishing diplomatic relations, trade agreements, and security cooperation. These aren't just diplomatic agreements. They're a fundamental realignment of the Middle East. For 70 years, the Arab world was officially united against Israel. Every Arab nation maintained the same position: no recognition, no negotiation, no peace until the Palestinian issue was resolved. That consensus is shattering. And here's what's driving the change. The Sunni Arab nations, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and others, aren't making peace with Israel because they suddenly love the Jewish state. They're making peace because they fear the Persian state even more. Think about what that means geopolitically. Iran has been building influence across the Middle East for decades, and the Sunni Arab nations watched this expansion with growing alarm. And suddenly, Israel, the nation the Arab world had officially opposed for 7 decades, looked less like an enemy and more like an ally against a common threat. But here's where this becomes prophetically significant. And this is going to become essential when we examine the snare Jesus warned about. Daniel 9:27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. He shall confirm the covenant with many. Now, let me be very clear about something before we go any further. I am not saying the Abraham Accords are the fulfillment of Daniel 9:27. The Antichrist hasn't been revealed. The tribulation hasn't started. We're not in the final 7 years. But here's what I am saying. The infrastructure for such a covenant is being built right now. Think about what's happening. Peace agreements between Israel and Arab nations, security cooperation against a common enemy, economic integration, diplomatic normalization, a framework of regional cooperation that didn't exist a decade ago. The Abraham Accords aren't the covenant Daniel described, but they're creating the conditions where such a covenant becomes possible. And here's what makes the current moment so significant. Saudi Arabia is the prize. The Abraham Accords included the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. But not Saudi Arabia. Not yet. And Saudi Arabia is the key to everything. Saudi Arabia is the guardian of Islam's 2 holiest sites, Mecca and Medina. Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Sunni Arab world. Saudi Arabia is the nation whose recognition would transform Israel's position in the region more than any other. And Saudi Arabia is closer to normalization with Israel than at any point in history. Think about what's been happening. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meeting with Israeli officials. Saudi Arabia opening its airspace to Israeli flights. Back-channel negotiations that have become increasingly public. The framework of a deal being constructed. Sound familiar? Daniel's covenant with many isn't described as a peace treaty with Israel alone. It's a covenant with many, a multilateral agreement, a regional framework, a structure that binds multiple nations together. And that's exactly what's being negotiated right now. But here's what most people don't see, and this connects to everything we've examined about Iran and Venezuela, and it's absolutely essential for understanding what's really happening. The pressure on Iran isn't separate from the Abraham Accords. It's connected. Every sanction on Iran makes the Arab nations feel more secure about aligning with Israel. Every military threat to Tehran makes normalization less risky for Riyadh. Every squeeze on the Persian regime creates space for the regional realignment to accelerate. Trump's locked and loaded warning to Iran isn't just about Iran. It's about reshaping the entire Middle East. And the Venezuela sanctions? They target an Iranian ally, weakening the economic network that supports the regime. Every front matters. Every pressure point contributes to the larger picture. But here's what should make every believer pay attention. The pieces are moving into place. Iran isolated and pressured. Arab nations aligning with Israel. The framework for a regional covenant being constructed. The infrastructure for Daniel's prophecy being built in real time. We're watching the table being set. The final meal hasn't been served yet, but the preparation is unmistakable. And that preparation leads us to something Jesus specifically warned about. Something that most people completely overlook. Something that explains why so many will be caught off guard when everything accelerates. Now we come to a warning that Jesus gave specifically about the end times. And this is going to connect everything we've examined about Iran, Venezuela, and the Abraham Accords. And it explains why what's happening right now is so dangerous for those who aren't paying attention. Jesus used a word that should stop every believer in their tracks. A snare. Luke 21:34-35. and take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting, and drunkenness, and cares of this life, and so that day come upon you unawares. For as a snare shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. A snare doesn't announce itself. Think about what a snare is. It's a trap designed to catch prey by surprise. The animal walking through the forest doesn't see it coming. One moment, freedom. The next moment, caught. The snare works precisely because it's hidden until it springs. And Jesus says that day, the day of his return, the culmination of everything the prophets described, will come as a snare on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Not some of them, all of them. But here's what Jesus specifically warned about, and this is where his words become intensely practical. He said, "Take heed to yourselves." Not take heed to the headlines, not take heed to the prophecy charts, not take heed to the political developments. Take heed to yourselves. The danger isn't that you won't know what's happening in the world. The danger is what's happening in your own heart. Are you overcharged with consumption? Distracted by endless entertainment, endless scrolling, endless accumulation of things that won't matter when the snare springs? Are you numbed by substances or habits that cloud your spiritual awareness? Anything that functions like drunkenness, dulling your perception, reducing your alertness, making you comfortable when you should be watchful? Are you consumed by the cares of this life? Bills, jobs, relationships, health concerns, financial pressures, legitimate concerns that can become illegitimate distractions when they crowd out eternal perspective? Think about what we've examined in this video. A president issuing military threats to a nation explicitly named in end times prophecy. Economic pressure applied simultaneously to multiple hostile regimes. The Middle East realigning in ways that create infrastructure for the covenant Daniel described. All of it happening at once, all of it accelerating. If the snare is real, if the signs are multiplying, if the birth pangs are intensifying, what should believers actually do? Number 1. Recalibrate your attention. Here's the reality most believers need to face, and this connects directly to the snare Jesus warned about. Your attention is the most contested resource you possess. Think about what competes for your awareness every single day. Social media algorithms designed to keep you scrolling. Entertainment platforms optimized for engagement. News cycles that generate outrage for clicks. Advertising that creates artificial needs. 1,000 voices screaming for your focus. And in the middle of all that noise, the still small voice of the Spirit trying to direct your attention to what actually matters. The snare catches those whose hearts are overcharged with distraction. The antidote is intentional recalibration. What if you spent as much time in Scripture as you spend on social media? What if you prayed as often as you checked your phone? What if you thought about eternity as frequently as you thought about your weekend plans? I'm not saying delete all your apps and move to a monastery. I'm saying examine where your attention goes. Because where your attention goes, your heart follows. The nations are aligning exactly where the Bible said they would. On November 18, 2025, Trump met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to finalize alliances that match Daniel and Ezekiel's end times prophecies written 2,500 years ago. You will be shocked when you discover 5 findings that show these diplomatic agreements are positioning the final coalition before the tribulation begins. Number 1. The Abraham Accords, the covenant with many. November 18, 2025. President Trump sits down with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at the White House. It's the first meeting between these two leaders since 2018. The headlines focus on oil prices, defense contracts, regional stability, but buried in the discussion is something that made every prophecy teacher in the world sit up and take notice. President Trump announced that he will sell F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia. Now, to most people, that's just a weapons deal. Advanced jets, military hardware, defense industry profits. But to students of Bible prophecy, that announcement signals something far more significant. Saudi Arabia, the leader of the Sunni Arab world, the guardian of Islam's holiest sites, the nation that has opposed Israel for 75 years, is moving toward full normalization with the Jewish state. And that has everything to do with a prophecy written by Daniel 2,500 years ago. But before we get to the prophecy, you need to understand what the Abraham Accords are, because without that context, you won't grasp why prophecy watchers are saying, this could be it. For decades, Arab nations refused to recognize Israel's right to exist. No trade, no diplomatic relations, no cooperation, just hostility, wars, and terrorism. But after the Accords, something changed. The UAE and Bahrain, both Muslim-majority Arab nations, officially recognized Israel, opened embassies, established economic ties, began security cooperation. The agreements were called the Abraham Accords because Abraham is the father of both the Jews, through Isaac, and the Arabs, through Ishmael. The symbolism was intentional. Two family lines, estranged for 4,000 years, coming back together. Morocco joined in December 2020. Sudan followed. Rumors circulated that other nations, Oman, Qatar, even Indonesia, were considering it. But there was always one nation that mattered more than all the others: Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia isn't just another Arab nation. It's the Arab nation. It's the birthplace of Islam. It houses Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites in the Islamic world. Every Muslim on earth prays toward Mecca 5 times a day. Every Muslim who's able makes pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia at least once in their lifetime. Saudi Arabia has enormous religious authority in the Muslim world. It's also the wealthiest Arab nation, the largest oil producer, and the de facto leader of the Sunni Arab bloc. So here's the reality. If Saudi Arabia normalizes with Israel, most of the Arab world follows. If the guardian of Mecca says it's acceptable to have relations with the Jewish state, other Muslim nations can justify it too. That's why prophecy watchers have been saying since 2020, the Abraham Accords are significant. But Saudi Arabia joining, that would be the real game changer. And now, in November 2025, Trump is hosting Mohammed bin Salman, discussing the sale of F-35s, moving Saudi Arabia closer to that normalization. So why does this matter prophetically? Because of a verse written by the prophet Daniel 2,500 years ago. Daniel 9:27 is one of the most studied, most debated, most analyzed prophecies in the entire Bible. And here's what it says: "And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." Let me break down the key phrases because every word matters. He shall confirm the covenant. The he in this verse is the Antichrist, the future world ruler who emerges during the tribulation. And the word confirm doesn't mean create from scratch. It means strengthen, enforce, make firm, give power to. So the Antichrist doesn't necessarily create a brand new peace treaty. He confirms, strengthens, or enforces an existing agreement. With many, not with one nation, not with two nations, with many, multiple nations, a multilateral agreement involving numerous parties. For 1 week. In Daniel's prophecies, weeks refer to weeks of years, 7-year periods. So 1 week equals 7 years. This is the final 7 years before Christ returns to establish his kingdom. What this means, at some point, a world leader, the Antichrist, will confirm, strengthen a covenant, a peace agreement, with many nations, a multilateral treaty, for 7 years. And that confirmation triggers the start of the tribulation, Daniel's 70th week, the final countdown to Armageddon and the second coming of Christ. For 2,000 years, Bible scholars wondered, what covenant? With which nations? When would this happen? And then, in 2020, something unprecedented occurred. The Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords are a peace normalization agreement with many nations. UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, potentially Saudi Arabia, and others multiple Arab nations normalizing with Israel through a single framework. It's exactly the kind of covenant with many that Daniel described. So the interpretation many prophecy teachers are making is this. The Abraham Accords may be the template, the framework, the existing agreement that a future leader, the Antichrist, will one day confirm or strengthen for a 7-year period. Think of it like this. The Abraham Accords are the house that's been built. Right now, no one's moved in yet. No one's signed a 7-year commitment. No one's triggered the prophetic countdown. But the house is ready. The framework exists. And when the right person comes along and says, I guarantee this agreement for 7 years, the clock starts ticking. Right now, the Abraham Accords involve important nations, but they're small. UAE has 10 million people. Bahrain has 1.5 million. Morocco and Sudan are significant, but not powerhouse nations. But Saudi Arabia? That's different. Saudi Arabia has 36 million people. If Saudi Arabia joins the Abraham Accords, it transforms from a regional agreement into a truly comprehensive covenant with many. It brings the full weight of the Arab world into normalization with Israel. And according to the interview with Saudi expert Karen Elliott House, the Crown Prince has set conditions. He won't join unless there's real progress on a Palestinian state. But here's the question. What if someone comes along who promises to solve that? What if a future leader brokers a deal that appears to give the Palestinians a state, brings Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords, and guarantees the whole arrangement for 7 years? That would be the covenant with many, confirmed by a charismatic leader for a specific time period, involving multiple nations. Exactly what Daniel prophesied. The pieces are moving into place. So what did Trump just do? He moved the pieces closer to that moment. By hosting Mohammed bin Salman, by announcing the F-35 sale, by strengthening U.S.-Saudi ties, Trump is positioning Saudi Arabia to eventually join the Abraham Accords. Is it happening today? No. Does the expert in the interview think it'll happen soon? No. She says the Crown Prince won't join anytime soon. But the fact that it's even being discussed? The fact that it's no longer unthinkable? The fact that Saudi Arabia is being armed by the United States, is moving toward economic cooperation with Israel, is being positioned as a partner rather than an enemy? That's unprecedented. That's historic. And prophetically, that's stage setting. But the Abraham Accords aren't the only prophecy being positioned, because there's another prophecy written by Ezekiel 2,600 years ago that describes exactly which nations will align with Israel and which will oppose it. And when you look at what's happening right now, the match is stunning. Let me show you. Number 2. The Gog-Magog Alliance. If you've studied Bible prophecy at all, you've probably heard of the Gog and Magog War. It's one of the most detailed, most specific, most studied prophecies in the entire Old Testament. Ezekiel 38 and 39 describe a massive invasion of Israel by a coalition of nations led by a figure called Gog, of the land of Magog. This invasion happens in the latter years, the end times. For centuries, scholars wondered, who are these nations? When will this happen? What triggers the war? And then, in the last 30 years, something remarkable occurred. The nations Ezekiel listed started aligning exactly as he predicted. Let me show you what the prophecy says, and then let me show you how what Trump just did fits into it perfectly. Ezekiel 38, 1-6, the invading coalition. Ezekiel 38, 1-6. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Let me identify these nations using modern geography. Magog, Meshech, and Tubal, ancient regions in what is now Russia and the former Soviet states. Most scholars identify this as Russia and its sphere of influence. Persia, this is the easiest to identify. Ancient Persia is modern Iran. No debate, no ambiguity. Persia equals Iran. Ethiopia and Libya. North African nations. Some scholars include Sudan and other African Muslim nations. Gomer, likely modern Turkey or regions in Eastern Europe. Togarmah, also likely Turkey or Armenia. So the coalition is Russia or a Russia-aligned power, Iran, Turkey, and various North African nations, all invading Israel in the latter days. Here's what's stunning. That exact coalition is forming right now. The nations that protest but don't fight. Ezekiel 38:13. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof, shall say unto thee, Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey? To carry away silver and gold? To take away cattle and goods? To take a great spoil? These nations don't join the invasion. They don't send troops. They don't help Israel militarily. They just ask questions. They protest verbally, but they don't act. Who are Sheba and Dedan? This is where it gets specific. Biblical scholars have identified Sheba and Dedan based on ancient geography and historical records. Sheba, an ancient kingdom in the southern Arabian Peninsula. The Queen of Sheba visited Solomon. Her kingdom was wealthy, powerful, and located in what is now Yemen and Saudi Arabia. Dedan, an ancient region in northwestern Arabia. Modern-day Saudi Arabia. So Sheba and Dedan are widely identified as the Arabian Peninsula, specifically Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. And Ezekiel says these nations will protest the invasion, but not join it. They'll ask, "Are you coming to take spoil?" But they won't send armies to defend Israel. Now, look at what's happening right now. Right now, in 2025, Iran, Persia, is Israel's greatest enemy, preparing for confrontation. Saudi Arabia, Sheba, Dedan, is moving toward normalization with Israel. Saudi Arabia is not allied with Iran. In fact, they're rivals. Saudi Arabia armed and wealthy, but not joining Iran's coalition, exactly as Ezekiel predicted. Saudi Arabia protesting and asking questions, but not sending troops to help Israel, exactly as Ezekiel predicted. The alignment is precise. Why the F-35 sale matters prophetically. The F-35 is the most advanced fighter jet in the world. Fifth-generation stealth technology. Unmatched air superiority. A game-changer for any nation that possesses it. Selling F-35s to Saudi Arabia does several things. Signals a deep U.S.-Saudi military alliance. You don't sell your most advanced weapons to enemies, only to close allies. Makes Saudi Arabia militarily capable. With F-35s, Saudi Arabia becomes one of the most powerful air forces in the region, but positions them as neutral, not allied with Israel's defense. Saudi Arabia will have the capability to help Israel, but Ezekiel says they won't. They'll protest. They'll ask questions, but they won't fight. A militarily strong Saudi Arabia that has economic, diplomatic ties with Israel, but doesn't send troops when Israel is invaded. That's exactly what Ezekiel 38:13 describes. Number 3. The peace and safety deception. The Apostle Paul wrote a letter to the church in Thessalonica about the day of the Lord, the tribulation period, the final years before Christ's return. And in that letter, he warned about something specific, something that would happen right before sudden destruction comes upon the world. He said people would be saying, "Peace and safety," not "war is coming," not "danger ahead," not "prepare for catastrophe." They'd be saying the exact opposite: peace, safety, security, stability. And then, while those words are still echoing in their ears, while they're celebrating their diplomatic achievements and congratulating themselves on solving ancient conflicts, sudden destruction falls. Like a thief in the night. Like labor pains on a pregnant woman. Inevitable. Unstoppable. Inescapable. Now, here's what makes this prophecy so chilling. It's not just about what happens. It's about the deception that precedes it. The false sense of security. The belief that humanity has finally achieved what it could never achieve before. Peace in the Middle East. And right now, in 2025, that's exactly what world leaders are proclaiming about the Abraham Accords. Let me show you the verse. And then, let me show you why what's happening with the Abraham Accords, with Saudi Arabia, with the Trump administration's Middle East policy, why all of it fits this warning with disturbing precision. The prophecy, 1 Thessalonians 5:1-3. 1 Thessalonians 5:1-3. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say, Peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Let me break this down phrase by phrase, because every word carries weight. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. Paul is addressing believers, Christians who understand prophecy, people who know the signs. He's saying, you don't need me to explain the timing. You already know. But then he gives them a specific warning anyway, because this particular deception is so convincing, so believable, so widespread, that even believers need to be reminded not to fall for it. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. The day of the Lord is the tribulation, the 7-year period of God's wrath poured out on a rebellious world, the time of judgment described in Revelation, and it comes as a thief in the night, unexpectedly, when people aren't ready, when they've let their guard down. Thieves don't announce themselves, they don't send warning letters, they strike when you're sleeping, when you're comfortable, when you think you're safe. That's the image Paul is using. The world will be caught completely off guard. For when they shall say, peace and safety. Not when there is peace and safety. When they say it, when they proclaim it, when they celebrate it. The words matter. The rhetoric matters. The narrative being pushed by world leaders, media, diplomats, that matters. And the words being used right now are precisely these: peace, safety, security, stability. Then sudden destruction cometh upon them. Then, not eventually, not years later, not after a long build-up. Then, immediately, suddenly, while the celebrations are still happening, while the ink on the peace treaties is still wet, while world leaders are congratulating themselves on their diplomatic brilliance, sudden destruction, as travail upon a woman with child. This is a specific image, labor pains. And if you know anything about childbirth, you know 3 things about labor pains. They're inevitable. Once they start, the baby is coming. There's no stopping it, no going back, no canceling the process. They intensify. They start mild, then get stronger, faster, more frequent, each wave worse than the last. They end in delivery. The pain leads somewhere. It produces something. In this case, it produces the day of the Lord, the full manifestation of God's judgment. And they shall not escape. This is the final phrase, the closing warning. No escape, no way out, no last-minute reprieve. Once the destruction begins, it's too late. The door is shut. The window is closed. The opportunity for salvation has passed. Now let me show you what world leaders, diplomats, and media outlets have been saying about the Abraham Accords since they were signed in 2020. Because the rhetoric matches Paul's warning with stunning precision. From the White House signing ceremony, President Trump. We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East. The dawn of a new Middle East. Not just an agreement, a new era, a transformation, a fundamental shift in the region's trajectory. Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel. This day is a pivot of history. It heralds a new dawn of peace. A new dawn of peace. The same phrase, the same promise. Peace has finally come to the Middle East. Abdullah bin Zayed, UAE Foreign Minister. Today, we are already witnessing a change in the heart of the Middle East, a change that will send hope around the world. Hope, change, peace. The rhetoric is unmistakable. From the United Nations, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, responding to the Abraham Accords, these agreements represent important steps towards peace and stability in the region. Peace, stability, the exact words Paul warned about. From Middle East leaders, Mohammed bin Zayed, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, the UAE and Israel have agreed to cooperate towards a better future. We are already witnessing a change in the heart of the Middle East. Bahrain's foreign minister. This is a historic breakthrough that will bring peace and prosperity to the region. From international media, headlines from major outlets in 2020. Historic peace. Israel and UAE strike normalization deal. A new era of peace in the Middle East. Abraham Accords bring hope for lasting regional stability. Peace breaking out across the Middle East. Peace, hope, stability, new era. Historic breakthrough. The word peace appears in virtually every statement, every headline, every analysis of the Abraham Accords. And now, in 2025, with Trump hosting the Saudi Crown Prince and discussing F-35 sales, the rhetoric continues. Analysts, if Saudi Arabia joins, it will cement a new security architecture in the Middle East. The narrative is consistent. We have achieved what previous generations could not. We have brought peace to the Middle East. The conflict is over. A new era has begun. But has it? Here's the problem with the peace and safety narrative. It's built on a foundation of unresolved conflicts, simmering tensions, and powder kegs waiting to explode. The peace is real in some ways. Trade is happening, embassies are open, economic cooperation is growing, but it's superficial. It doesn't address the root causes of Middle East instability. Let me show you what's not resolved. Tension number 1. The Palestinian issue. This is the elephant in the room. The Abraham Accords normalized relations between Israel and several Arab nations, but they didn't create a Palestinian state. They didn't resolve the status of Jerusalem. They didn't address refugees, borders, or settlements. In fact, the Abraham Accords essentially bypassed the Palestinian issue entirely. Arab nations said, "We're going to have relations with Israel regardless of whether the Palestinian problem is solved." That infuriated the Palestinians. They felt abandoned by their Arab allies, betrayed by nations that once championed their cause. And according to the interview with Karen Elliott House, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince has said explicitly he won't join the Abraham Accords unless there's real progress on a Palestinian state. But when asked if she thought that would happen, House said, "I don't see that happening any time in the near future." So what happens? Does Saudi Arabia join anyway and abandon the Palestinian condition? Does someone broker a miraculous deal that appears to solve the problem? Does a future leader promise a solution that sounds good, but ultimately proves false? The Palestinian issue is unresolved. And as long as it's unresolved, the peace is incomplete. Tension number 2. Iran's existential threat. Iran has not changed its position at all. The Abraham Accords didn't change any of that. If anything, they made Iran more aggressive, because now Iran sees a growing coalition aligned against it: Israel, UAE, Bahrain, potentially Saudi Arabia, all backed by the United States. Iran feels threatened, isolated, surrounded, and threatened, isolated, surrounded nations don't surrender. They lash out. And here's another issue most people miss. The Abraham Accords and the U.S. weapons sales that accompany them are fueling a massive arms race. UAE bought F-35s as part of their deal. This isn't the first time in history that peace and safety preceded sudden destruction. Let me show you some chilling historical parallels. Example number 1. Peace for our time. 1938. September 30th, 1938. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returns from Munich, Germany, where he just negotiated an agreement with Adolf Hitler. Chamberlain stands before the cameras, waves a piece of paper, and declares, "My good friends, for the second time in our history, a British Prime Minister has returned from Germany, bringing peace with honor. I believe it is peace for our time. Peace for our time. Safety secured through diplomacy. Conflict averted through negotiation." The crowds cheered. The newspapers celebrated. The world breathed a sigh of relief. And less than 1 year later, and World War II began. Now here's what you need to understand. This isn't accidental. The peace and safety deception isn't just people being naive. It's part of the enemy's strategy. Satan wants the world lulled into complacency. He wants people believing everything is fine. He wants them distracted by prosperity, peace agreements, and diplomatic achievements. Why? Because Jesus said to watch and be ready. And if you think everything is fine, you stop watching. The Antichrist will use peace as a weapon. Daniel 8:25 describes the Antichrist this way: "And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He also shall stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. By peace shall destroy many." Not by war, not by violence, by peace. The Antichrist will come as a peacemaker, a diplomat, a problem solver. He'll broker agreements that seem to solve ancient conflicts. He'll be celebrated as the greatest leader in human history. And through that peace, he'll destroy many. How? By lulling them into false security, by getting them to lower their defenses, by making them believe the age-old conflicts are finally over. And then, when they're comfortable, when they're celebrating, when they're not watching, he'll reveal his true nature. He'll break the covenant. He'll demand worship. He'll unleash the Great Tribulation. Peace and safety. Sudden destruction. The Abraham Accords could be the template. Now, are the Abraham Accords the Antichrist's covenant? No, because the Antichrist hasn't been revealed yet. But could they be the template? Could they be the framework he uses? Absolutely. Imagine this scenario. A charismatic world leader emerges. He sees the Abraham Accords, this existing framework of Arab-Israeli normalization, and he says, "This is brilliant, but it's incomplete. Let me expand it. Let me bring in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Indonesia. Let me solve the Palestinian issue. Let me guarantee the whole arrangement." And he brokers a comprehensive peace deal, a covenant with many that includes full normalization between Israel and the entire Arab world, a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as a shared capital, international guarantees of security, economic integration, religious access to holy sites for all faiths. The world celebrates. Nobel Peace Prize. United Nations standing ovation. Headlines declaring peace finally achieved in the Middle East. And he guarantees it for 7 years. Personally, I will ensure this agreement holds for 7 years. The clock starts ticking. For 3.5 years, it works. Peace, prosperity, stability. Exactly what was promised. And then, in the middle of the 7 years, he breaks the covenant, reveals himself as the Antichrist, demands worship, defiles the temple, unleashes the Great Tribulation. Peace and safety. Sudden destruction. That's the pattern Paul warned about. And the Abraham Accords provide the perfect template for exactly that kind of deception. Let me show you why this deception is so effective. Why people fall for it. Why even smart, informed, cautious people will be caught off guard. Reason number 1. People want to believe in peace. After decades of war, conflict, people are desperate for peace. They want to believe it's finally possible. They want to believe the breakthrough has happened. And when leaders offer them that hope, when agreements are signed and progress seems real, it's psychologically difficult to remain skeptical. Jeremiah 6:14 describes false prophets in ancient Israel who did exactly this. They have healed also the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. They proclaimed peace when there was no peace. They gave people false hope. They told them what they wanted to hear. And people believed it because they desperately wanted it to be true.